want to make millions. I don't want to have to do much. What do you got for me? And I'm like, who's this? Wrong number. You know, when we talk about franchising, we talk about that you have proven out your model. Show your corporate numbers. Let people do a colonoscopy on your P&L. So the more automated that we're all getting, Charles, I feel like it also can be hurting this process.
Focus on that brand story and what got you in the game, because you're going to find your differentiator there.
Oh, does that get me excited?
When it comes to franchising or anything really, one of the biggest questions is, how do you know if you're doing things the right way, if you're on the right track? What are the signposts that you're on your way to success, and what are the warning signs? Today, we're speaking with Lisa Linkowsky, a franchise advisor, everything from consulting with franchise buyers to emerging and startup franchisors. It's going to be an amazing conversation, and we're going to figure things out. Lisa, I got excited just on our pre-conversation and all of the times we meet. So I'm excited that we're going to have this conversation together today.
Likewise, Charles. Thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah, no. So Lisa, so for everyone watching, you know, Lisa is a leader in the franchise world, a trusted advisor. And what's going to be interesting about the conversation, what Lisa can share, is she's seen very different dimensions on the franchise world, working with franchise buyers, working with emerging franchisors. And she's really been someone that I respect in terms of doing things the right way and no nonsense. So Lisa, I'm like, this is a no holds barred. Let's like dive in here. And
I'm rolling up the sleeves, Charles.
Yeah,
roll them up.
Let's go. So in the open, we were talking about signposts and signals for franchisors to know if they're on the right track. And on the other end of this equation, you have franchise buyers, right? How do they know if they're looking at the right franchise opportunity? So, I mean, what's better than you to, like, from a perspective of a franchise buyer, so could you share what they're looking for in brands, and then ultimately what you're looking for to know they're on the right track?
Great question. So, you know, the funny thing, it changes year by year. I feel like it goes. And in the last couple of years, and you know this, what I'm about to say, the bane of my existence has been the passive, the search for the elusive passive unicorn that, you know, people are landing on my doorstep and saying, you know, I want to make millions. I don't want to have to do much. What do you got for me? And I'm like, who's this? Wrong number. Like, I don't have anything for you on this, right? So educating people and letting them know that, yes, there's executive models, of course, and that's what you're searching for. Like, I have someone right now, she's like, I don't want to buy myself a job. And I'm like, I totally get that, because out of the 600 concepts plus that I represent, there are absolutely businesses that you're buying a job. That's what you're doing. But then there are others where you can represent an empire. Like, literally, it's the sky's the limit as big as you want this thing to be. You're not, you know, there's no holds barred, right? So I think it's that education, because social media, it filters on people when they're, you know, drunk, searching, you know, at 2:00 in the morning, they've had a couple whiskeys or wines, and that algorithm finds them, and then they start hearing what they want to hear instead of what is reality, if that makes sense.
It does. And you know, like any other industry, I think that you have amazing founders, brands, people that are passionate and care to the end, and others that I wouldn't say that they don't care. They just don't understand their obligation, right? They don't understand where they're going.
Lose focus.
Yeah. And you know, it's interesting to me too, like from the franchise buyer perspective. I have a friend who invested in a well-known service-based, not retail brick and mortar service business. And their first 2 locations were horrible. Years later, though, like they kept going at it and they kept going, and now they've built generational wealth, right? And I know that's, and then for us, we represent so many emerging franchisors. And we had a podcast yesterday, one of our clients, she's amazing. And she was so positive. And I said to her, and it was Marina at Your Swim. I said, why are you so positive? Right. And she's like, because I've spent the last 2 years as in the franchise world, really learning and refining what my obligations are as a franchisor and making sure I can deliver. And I thought that was really compelling in terms of really taking accountability and hold of her responsibility and where she needs to go.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. 100%.
So, Lisa, so for franchise buyers, well, actually, from the franchisor perspective, what should they know that franchise buyers should be evaluating? The positive, the negative. How should a franchisor address the counter narrative or negative component of their business, whether it's labor or not? Brands sometimes hide the negative, or how should they approach their thought process when they're dealing with franchise buyers?
So I think first and foremost, when I talk to businesses is number one, how long have you been in business? That's most important to me. Like if you've only been in business 6 months, you haven't even proven out your system, right? Like that's the whole, I think that's, when we talk about franchising, we talk about that you have proven out your model. And the only way to do that is by being in business a few years, in my opinion, right? A few years. If you have a couple locations, terrific. If you have a couple locations across the country, even better, right? Like, if you know that it's something that's definitely going to land no matter where it's at, then great. But sometimes, like medical is a great example where they're in one state and then they franchise and they don't understand that there's medical differences in every single state. Sometimes by county, there are different regulations, right? So I would say being in business, stepping outside of your area to understand that the other areas are going to be that compliance piece of it. That profitability is also key. And that lends itself to the item 19, Charles. So it's my firm belief that for those that are listening, there's something called a franchise disclosure document that every franchise has to have. And they're disclosing to potential investors everything about their business. And one of the things is financial representation. And if a business is opting not to show an item 19, I won't even show them. Forget it. Because I go, listen, if you've been in business a few years, you don't have to have any franchisees. Show your corporate numbers. Be all out there. Let people do a colonoscopy on your P&L so that they can see, because they're not going to be as strong as you. They're just not. You're the corporate. You created this. But if they can sit there and go, you know what, I could get pretty close to that, or, a fair amount in that, they've got something to go with. But if they don't have those numbers, what are they supposed to be looking at? How are they supposed to be trying to make this humongous decision? So I think those two areas are very critical.
So, right, model, unit economics. And what I like about what you're expressing too for franchisors out there, which is number one, it's very rare that those initial franchisees replicate those economic numbers, at least not initially, right?
Oh.
But you have to be genuine about it, because like when you go through the franchising process, just because you have these standout numbers, or we run into not issues but things we have to navigate, where maybe a franchisor is operating in multiple territories and how we account for that. But you really need to be genuine about the unit economics of not only your good performance, but can franchisees replicate this and how you're going to help them get there, right?
That's right, because you were telling them that they can. You were saying you are going to be able to have this great business. And again, it may not be to the level of the corporate location like what you just talked about, but it should be a good enough, robust business in and of itself. And I think that if franchisors were more cautious and careful about this, it would also lend them not to sit there and just automatically get into business with their relative, or so a customer that happened to come in, and to be more thoughtful, going, these first 10 people that come in as our franchisees can literally make or break this system. And we want them to be as passionate and as excited and as, financially, you know, stretched for whatever they are purchasing, whatever they're investing in, that's not going to end. And I think that they're not looking at what that long end game is. They're just excited. They're excited. People come in, they're like, hey, have you thought about this being a franchise? In fact, I have. Here you go. Give me a check. Okay. But no. It has to be much more thoughtful than that, because it's not great, especially if they don't do well and they close out. And now you've got to disclose that. Who wants that? Nobody.
Lisa, I think that's critical. What gets me, we'll interact with emerging and new franchisors at different stages of their journey, or they'll come to me in 2 years in and they'll say, oh, I have all these projections and financial pro formers that our advisors prepared, and they're all fiction. Because, like, to your point, when we work with our clients, I'm like, look, you may go from where you are today to being a franchisor, having your FDD 90 to 120 days, but that's just the starting point. And look at the first 2 years, 24 months is building the foundation, which is, to your point, you need those first number of pioneering franchisees to succeed, do well, validate, right? And I think a mistake that new franchisors make is they assume, because they have an FDD and an operations manual and someone buys it, that, okay, now it's up to the franchisee to succeed.
Right.
Whereas really they're almost like your own locations.
That's right. Everyone is figuring it out. They are. I was the first franchisee in my system. And yes, they had figured out the overall process, but they hadn't figured it out yet as a franchise, right? As a system, and for how to expand it nationwide, and for different personalities that come in, and all the different things that come from, when you're sitting there and just in your local, area, your local municipality, and now all of a sudden you are elsewhere. And there's just so much growing pains. And that's why, you've really got to have more of that entrepreneur spirit if you're looking to invest in a very young, emerging franchise. Whereas if someone has 100 locations, now they've figured it out. At least they should have. And if they haven't, that's a big red flag, right? Like, by 100 locations, you're in good shape. That doesn't mean that they won't make changes from time to time, but they're not looking to you at that point to kind of figure things out, right?
Lisa, let's, in terms of signpost signals, I'm a new franchisor. Maybe I'm in the space a year or two. What are some signs or signals? Like I gave the example, the client I spoke about, we closed just one location. It's been about 2 years. We actually rebooted her system because it's a service industry, and different elements, but she's been to a number of conferences and events. She's on iteration 3.0 of her website. She's networking with other franchisors, right? About understanding next steps, when to hire, who to hire, that stuff. So those are positive signs, right? And she's understanding her obligation, right? We had a detailed conversation about, hey, let's be heavy on our item 7, our estimated investment, on how much you need to reserve for marketing, not only at startup along the way. What are some warning signs that emerging franchisors need to take heed of or notice to know they're off track or they need to adjust?
So I think it lends itself to another point, and this is going to wrap right into what you're talking about, is how invested is the franchisor in their original location. And I think that stems from everything. So if they're still busy working with that first location, their corporate location, and they're not giving the time and their talent into growing this franchise system, that starts to lend itself into issues. I really am very cautious and concerned when a franchisor is doing the frantive, right? And they're still working at their other location, at their corporate location. So they're not able to really fully understand. They're trying to live both sides of the fence. And becoming a franchise system is a new business all unto itself. And you almost have to divorce yourself from that ownership of that other business, like at that point, so that you can keep your pulse on the marketing and on the training and on how the franchisees are doing and everything that goes into that. Because otherwise you can be caught off on unaware so fast because you're being pulled into your other business and you don't have the bandwidth to sit there and pay attention. And then things start to fall apart. And like you said, the franchisees, just because they bought this doesn't mean it's all just going to magically happen. They're going to need some hand-holding. They're going to need some time with you, especially in that early emerging franchise, space. And you want to give it to them, most importantly, like you want to give it to them and they want to see that. And then they become the champions in your system. And now when it goes to validation where prospective investors get to speak to them, they've got great things to say, because when they say, one of the questions I have my candidates ask is, how's the support from the franchise system? And they get to say, excellent. Like they're there. I snap my fingers. They're there. They're responsive. They take care of me. They react. Sometimes maybe they don't acquiesce to what I'm asking and they've got a reason for it, but they listen and they've got a reason for why they can't go along with my request. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense, Lisa. When you're working with brands, so support and training, what are some of the other things that you want the founders to focus on, or where you find they may be overlooking tasks or things they should be doing as a franchisor?
Lack of response. If I send a territory check, I belong to a broker network, the International Franchise Professionals Group, which you're well familiar with there. And we have something called a territory check. And I'm not expecting within hours, but I say within 24 hours at minimum, I should be getting a response back, right? Wouldn't you say that's a pretty reasonable thing? And if it's on the weekend, I'm not expecting a response. I get them from many, but I don't expect it. But if you're coming back to me days later and saying, oh, yeah, thanks for checking in, that territory is available, I'm sorry, but you're dead to me. Because this is so important that if you can't respond to me as someone who has a live body, someone who could be a potential investor in your business, and you're not responsive, then what's it going to look like when they're coming in? How's that going to look? What's that going to be like? So that lack of response is very, very concerning to me. And so I do worry when a franchise system is operating on all cylinders and they're starting to misfire and they're not responding and they're not getting back to my candidate. I've had that happen where they don't even set up the introduction meeting. I've sent and registered a candidate and I'm like, hey, candidate, have you set up that meeting yet? They're like, no, I haven't heard from them yet. That makes me look bad. And I'm like, no, we're done here. And sadly, it's usually probably the fran dev person, right? And they just made the franchise system look very, very bad. But that franchisor, that CEO, they've got to be on top of that. They have to make sure that communication is seamless and that responsiveness is there. And I also will say that I'm really gun shy, and it's probably my generation, Charles. I'm gun shy of automatic responses for everything. I can't stand that, where it's like an auto response. Candidate, we met with the candidate. It went very well. Next up is 2.53. And I'm like, no. I send back a message. I'm like, that's great. Love the canned response. What happened? How was your discussion? Were they responsive? Did they ask questions? Was there any kind of thing that you saw that, that I need to know about, that I should be concerned about? So the more automated that we're all getting, Charles, I feel like it also can be hurting this process, because that human interaction, when you're making one of the most important decisions of your life, is really, it's really critical.
I love that advice, Lisa. I never even thought about in terms of the auto responses, but even deeper, what you're sharing when you're saying what you as a consultant and you're potentially recommending this brand, what should I know about? What do I need to know? The like it's and I don't think it's generational. I think it's good business and communication. And so I mean I think so many, especially the newer franchisors, don't realize franchise consultants, advisors, they're business people, small business, running their businesses, working hard. Lisa, in an ideal world, what are some of the milestones or things you like to see, or in a process when you're interacting with a brand where you're like, okay, they get it, whether it's having that what are some of the things franchisors should, anyone watching this, say, well, am I doing this or am I doing that?
So my background's marketing, and one of
Oh,
the things that I advise all of my franchisors that I speak to is to make sure that they've got a great video to talk
yeah,
about their brand,
yeah.
because everything today is about storytelling. Everything. And I create a nice, beautiful slide that's a 10,000-foot overview about the brand when I present it to my candidate. And then I'll show a 2-minute video. And I sit there with them while they're watching it. I watch their expression, and then we talk about it, right? And I feel like when a brand does not invest into something like that, it hurts them. This is just my opinion, but in this world that we live in today, you have to have things like that. It's not just about, having the print. You've got to have the print, absolutely. But having a video is key. And so telling that story, having that founder tell their story. I just hosted a franchise forum this week, and I had 4 founders and 1 area rep, and hearing their story. And I've heard their stories over and over, and I get taken in by their story each and every single time. And you can see the audience getting taken in by it. So you want to have something like that right off the bat on YouTube, on all of your socials, so that people can see it.
By the way, like, one of my favorite books was Donald Miller's book on, and we even have, when we go through the franchising process, we have a workshop for our clients on their brand story. And I tell them, you're not going to get it right away, but this is over the next year to like and we see real momentum. So I think that advice is, at least I think that's the most important, and everyone gets it wrong. It's not fake, but when you go through that effort of building your brand story, and we have this great workshop and workbook about, at the end of the workbook, it's like, what is your transformative headline? What are your 3 uniques? What is the transformation your buyers experience? And it's not easy. When I do that internal, when we go through this for our own business here,
Right.
but if you grapple with that, what I find too is you're not just telling a story, and what people refer to as marketing ends up becoming very genuine, because then
Yes.
it reaches core values and you better uphold them. I love that advice. I think too many get it wrong. And what I find even worse is when the done for you service is like, hey, we're going to package everything for you. You're going to get everything on the planet, including all this marketing. And I go to the website and it's like, franchise with us, join $1 billion industry. We're not going to tell you anything about our founder. We're never going to talk about our unit economics, but you're going to pay a 6% royalty and invest $500,000. I want
Yes.
to just shoot myself in the head.
It's so bland and generic, and it has no life to it. And I see that all the time. I go to the franchise website, same thing, and
Yep.
I'm bored. Like, frankly, I'm bored by it.
Yep.
So the other thing I would say is transparency.
I
So
love that.
transparency, and this comes to responsible franchising, which we know is the big, hashtag that's going around, but genuine transparency, talking about, again, your numbers. And some stuff legally they cannot share, which I understand, but they can share with people like me so that I can feel more comfortable even though I can't tell my candidate, I have more confidence, that they're sharing really strong unit economics with me, that I can go, all right, I get that. I can see that. I know what my candidate is looking for, and they can get there with this brand. And that's why I say to my candidates, I'm like, listen, I can't talk about financials with you, but I know what you're looking for, and I'm going to go searching for it. And when franchisors are tight-lipped and they're buttoned up and they don't share any of that, it makes my job very difficult, very, very difficult. So transparency, and also I would say, really, what is that differentiator? That is so important to me. And I'm always looking for it, and I'm always asking the franchisor. And a lot of time they don't answer because there's just, there's a glut of that type of industry, that type of sector. And I'm just like, give me something that I can, and not something fake, something real. If you've got a proprietary product, if you've got, something that is in your secret sauce. Like we talked about labor. Labor is so difficult for everybody. What is your secret sauce? And there are franchisors that do have a secret sauce for their labor and how to address that issue. And when they have it and they know how to do it and they can then provide that to their franchisees, oh, does that get me excited?
Those brand story, transparency. You said two things here that I think are critical on the transparency front. I'll start with the differentiator. That was the last one. It's so sad and I get it too. Look, we're a franchise law firm, right? We help people franchise legal and all these other things. And when I'm speaking with other franchisors, they're in X industry. Well, they're like, we're in X industry. Other people are in X industry. There is a differentiator. If at your core values, how you execute, how you perform, how you make it happen, right? And for a lot of our clients, when people ask me, I'm like, one of the things is our legal plus it's our advisory. And when you look back, whether it's private equity, you're going to see some stepping stones where we added extra value and helped you succeed. You struggle with, all business owners struggle with it, but if you believe your product is the best and you're going to do the right thing for your good fit franchisee, you need to answer that, right? And I think that's, like, anyone listening, Lisa, to what you just said, you really need to understand your differentiator. And if you think there is no differentiator, then I would say either you shouldn't be franchising or you're not giving yourself enough credit, and you need to really rethink what got you here. And ironically, if you follow your advice, focus on that brand story and what got you in the game, because you're going to find your differentiator there.
I'm also going to jump in with one more thing, Charles.
Oh, I love this.
One of the biggest problems in franchising is that the relationship can become adversarial between the franchisee and franchisor over time. And they start to get resentful of the amount of money that they're paying back to the franchise system. And I warn all of my candidates, don't ever let me hear you say that, right? Like, I warn them about it ahead of time. I'm like, you didn't create this. Someone else went through blood, sweat, and tears to get, this business to where it is. You're paying this fee. We're in Jersey, Charles, so this VIG, for the honor of being in this system, right? Like, that's really what it's supposed to be looked at. However, if a franchisor becomes extremely grubby with their fees, and they're banging the franchisees over the head and becoming unreasonable with the fees and the royalties, and they have to use this supplier and they're getting a chunk off the back end, and it's just this ridiculous amount, and the franchisee is wilting under that pressure and under that weight, that's not going to be good. So I tell every brand that I talk to that wants to become a franchise system, I go, you know what I'm drawn to? And I said, and very few franchisors do it, those that scale their royalty back. They start at one number, and then as you hit your revenue goals as a franchisee, the number goes down. Why don't more franchisors do that? To reward that relationship, because they're not looking at the long haul. They're not looking at the big picture, right? And also giving them a break for that first 6 months in some way, because that that's going to be the toughest time, instead of dinging them over the head the moment that they get started. All of those little things that a franchisor can do to show that they are rooting for the franchisee's success.
And you said look at the big picture. That's critical advice, right? Not getting absorbed into what the franchise fee is or isn't, but the understanding your franchisees are your customers. You need them to succeed. And those royalties, which I love, if you're achieving and performing, the royalty scales back. I agree with you. But I think your bigger point is understanding. You're trying to expand that mindset of the emerging franchisor to understand the lifeblood of your business are these royalties and your franchisee success, right? And so it's big. When we see, you see it too, successful franchise systems, what are the commonalities? Well, their unit economics are hitting. Also, we'll see multi-unit franchisees, because they're hitting that repeat button. I was really proud. I was speaking to one of our clients, an emerging brand, and franchisee was complaining about supply chain. And when we got under the hood, he's like, no, Charles, we're repackaging because so the franchisees can buy in smaller quantities that they want. Oh, and by the way, we marked it up at the level of 0. We're doing this right. And I'm like, you know what? I'm so on your side right now. And they're trying to help those franchise. But I agree. Like, you need to understand your franchisees are your customers. And I didn't say it. I forget who said it. I certainly didn't. In fact, I don't know how many original things I say. It's very few. But it's your primary obligation is making those franchisees wealthy and successful. Which, Lisa, I want to get to another thing you mentioned on transparency, which I love. And I think it's so important for franchisors to think of it this way. You were talking about or speaking about, I want transparency. And then you were reflecting on your genuine concern of, hey, when I recommend a brand and when I look at your franchise system, I'm paraphrasing, you said, I know what my candidate is looking for. And your question is whether or not this brand can help them get there, which I think is so genuine, right? And so I think for the franchisors that are going to be listening to this, you need to understand that there's an economic opportunity that the franchise buyer is looking for, whether it's supplemental income or legacy building. And someone like you, Lisa, who's committed to your obligation, you just said it in not in even a. You said, I need to know that they can help them achieve that economic goal. How do you, we have a little chart when we're working with our clients. We go through the development process. Hey, what's our estimated investment? What's the ROI expectations? Is it supplemental income replacement? What is our positioning, how we own it? Where do you think franchisors go wrong with understanding economic expectations?
I will start with what the amount of money that the franchisee, the investor, has, and how much liquid capital that they are expecting. Whatever they tell me, I always double it to my candidate. I double it because I think it's too little. I think that this whole methodology that's being overused of people just draining their retirement funds is not a great thing. I'm not a proponent of that. And I think it's very scary. And I think it's also very dangerous that, if someone comes to me and they don't have, I literally have had people where they've got $20,000 in their checking account, but they have $500,000 in their retirement and they're 55 years old. What do you think I'm going to say to them? This is not something that you should be doing. You've got to be super cautious. You saved your entire life for your retirement, right? You saved for your entire life. You have $20,000 in cash. Everything else is tied up in what is supposed to be your next chapter when you decide that you're done. Now, I'm not saying you can't take a portion of that, but once that door gets opened, then we know it's just going down, down, down. Because, I'll go to this one, the working capital. Oh, this is my favorite. My favorite question I ask my candidates is, when do you think you're going to pay yourself? That's my favorite question. And very few get it right. Very few. They're like, a couple months. And I'm like, wrong. On average, Charles, year and a half, 2 years, 3 years before you're paying yourself often. And people don't want to be out loud about that. And they are very worried to say that out loud. But do your clients a favor. Not everyone should own a home. Not everyone should go to college. Not everyone should own a business. And it's okay to say no to people because you know that this could decimate them. You know it. And if they're leaving a 6-figure salary, right? And they need that money to sustain their expenses in their home. And you know that on average, as a franchisor, they're not going to be able to start paying themselves for a year, year and a half. Come on. Like, let's do more, to be honest about that, and speak about it. Because I say to my candidates, listen, especially if they're younger, I like talking to them when they're younger, start a plan, start a rainy day, business fund, start a plan. But if people do not have that financial runway, it's going to lead to financial ruin. And that is, I think, the biggest area that franchisors need to improve upon, honestly.
I think that's amazing advice. And one of the obvious points there too is if you're candid about that and the franchisee expectations align, when a year later they're not drawing a salary, they're not disgruntled, they're actually building towards something and they validate, versus someone who's performing just as well but didn't have the right expectations. Lisa, that brings up a question. It comes up often, especially for the newer franchisors, questions about how should I decide what are the liquidity requirements I'm looking for in a franchisee candidate, capital. And also a question comes up is, what's good ROI? Like what's a good measure of ROI for successful franchise investment?
So I tend not to be a big food proponent because the ROI in food is so slim. And I came from the food industry, so I'm very, very familiar with it. And I just sit there looking at, why would I show something that has a 12% ROI when I have other concepts that are 30, 40%? Like, why would I do that? And the reason why people come to me about food is because they know it. Everyone eats. Everyone sees a line at a food place. They see, that it seems fun and it seems, exciting. And so they don't understand that ROI can be very, very thin in a food franchise, right? Not across, I'm painting a broad brush, but you know what I mean? Across the board, it's pretty thin. So I really think that if you've got, and this is the other thing, when I talk to a business that wants to become a franchise, I'm like, if you are making a 30% profit, you have to now slice off 10% for the expectation for your franchisee. Between the royalty, between the ad fund, all that, you're slicing off 10%. So now you go 20%. 20% is a good ROI, right? Like, I think that's a decent thing, 20%. So and I say to them, if you can get it to 25% for them, like, how much more exciting is that for them? Like, you're at 35 and they're at 25. Like, that would be amazing. So the healthier and stronger and more robust that ROI is, the better everyone is. And then also, by the way, the better your resale value is going to be. And your valuation, like, that all goes hand in hand. So I'm always drawn to things that are going to be in that higher ROI threshold. And that could mean leaving the really expensive lease behind concepts often, because that expensive lease, especially here in Jersey, right? Like, that's going to be an expensive chunk of your business. And so if you have to be in a Class A strip mall for your business, that's going to slice in a lot of that profit. So I may go, I'm going to show you this, but now look at this where you don't have that expensive lease, and look at your numbers, do a pro forma. Let them come to that realization.
Lisa, when you're working with a franchisor and they say, okay, we're going to look for a candidate. This is what we're looking for. This is the liquid capital we want. How do you evaluate those criteria for liquid capital, available capital, in terms of advising franchisors?
So in my portal with IFPG, it will say, here's the liquid capital requirement. Let's say it's 250,000. I'm often like, it should be 500,000. Or if they're saying, your net worth. And net worth, I ask that of all my candidates, but net worth is also very subjective, because if they've got their money tied up in another real estate holding, so you've got to look at how much money that they've got access to and what kind of lifestyle that they're living also. Like, how much do they own on their house? And then, they're like, well, I'm going to take out a HELOC for this, a home equity line. And they only have a very small percentage to work from in that, and they're over leveraged on their home. So you're sitting there kind of looking at this going, now I'm not a financial expert. I'm going to have them go speak to, a financial lender that can sit there and see what they can get pre-approved from. But I'm going to be cautious with them, and saying to them, now I had someone, single mom, she said to me outright, I will downsize my lifestyle in order to make this happen. Okay. She's acknowledging that. But often people are not acknowledging that, and they want to keep going at that high level of expenses and everything else that they've got going on, and they're not fully funded. Also in the FDD, they've got item 5 through 7, which breaks down all of your expenses, and they always give a range. And I always tell all my candidates, go to the right side of the column, go to the higher end of the range for every single thing. Do your pro forma based upon that. And if you come out less than that, we'll pop a champagne,
Right.
We'll pop it together. But go to that. Don't go to the minimum, go to the maximum, especially if you live in coastal areas.
Lisa, we definitely have to do a part 2 of this, because I'm like, the information is amazing. The franchisor speaking to candidates, and then everything sounds great, and then the deal just goes away. Something comes up, or they'll be like, oh, Charles, they had a family issue, or they had this. I thought we were about to close it. But, I'll tell the client, typically it's usually not a family issue. They felt there was a lack of clarity about something, and they got cold feet. So any thoughts there is what a franchisor should be aware of? Like, you may not hear it or know it, but something's off with what you're communicating.
So this is where it really benefits a franchisor to work with people like me that are doing this, the right way, right? Because we're poking and prodding them. Like I always say to everyone, I'm not selling you on anything. I'm educating you, and I'm helping you to explore this world. And if at the end of the day, you decide that this is not right for you, I tell all my candidates, I just did my job, right? I did my job. And maybe it's not now, maybe it's in 5 years, maybe it's in 2 years. But if I have gotten you to that point, it's okay. So I think that oftentimes the franchisor can be guilty, and my franchise system was guilty of this, of telling them what the candidate wants to hear, right? And they're not being forthcoming, and they're not poking holes back at them. So I often say that we call it frick and frack, where we can sit there and talk to the franchisor and say, hey, listen, did you know that this issue has come up? Did they make you aware of that? No, I was not aware of that. I'm so glad that you put that on my radar. Conversely, oh, Lisa, did you know that they're open to moving to the West Coast? No, that never even came up. Where did that come from? Right. So having that conversation back and forth is so incredibly important. But if you're not working with a franchise advisor and that lead came to them organically, it's going to go back to that this is an awarding process. It should never be a selling process, and that they should be feeling the pulse of that candidate the entire time and address that fear. Get that fear out of them. What are they most concerned about? I get that out of my candidate from day one. And then we talk about it. What is your biggest fear? Oh, we just came through that big election. That was a big fear for a lot of people, the uncertainty. And we talked about it. And I said, listen, do you think that whoever gets elected, that the next day all the businesses are just going to fold up? Like, do you think that people are going to stop eating and they're not going to go to gyms and they're not going to get their dog boarded? Like, is that what you're kind of thinking is going to happen? And they're like, oh, right. And I'm like, yeah. I'm like, could there be some wobbly things that are happening here and there with whatever administration? Sure. But that's life and that's business ownership. So hitting onto those fear points and talking about them instead of being scared to address them because they don't want to hear it, or like we talked about, they know maybe in the back of their head that they don't have enough financial runway, maybe. And they're like, they're going to work it out. They're such great people. Someone's going to give them the money. Someone's going to help them out. So being upfront and saying, hey, listen, I'm a little concerned about your finances. What are you thinking? Like, do you have someone else that's going to help you out? Like, to keep those lights on and to keep plugging along, if in case you have to keep reinvesting into your business and funds are getting tough. What's your plan? I think that having those kind of really candid conversations makes the franchisee feel they're not being sold and that they are looking at a true partnership.
I think that example it's very genuine. And I think the advice you gave, Lisa, for anyone who's watching or listening to this, it's such an inside ballpark. What I love about where we're leaving off on is a genuine conversation about what's best for that franchise candidate, which also becomes, not only is it a good fit for them, but is that going to be a good fit for your franchise system?
Best for the system. The better the system, the better everyone all gets lifted up.
Lisa, I love this. We'll do a part 2 of this because I'm like, I got a ton of notes. I really appreciate it.
I'm sorry.
No, this has been like anyone, people are going to love this video, and I appreciate it. I know I've been looking forward to this for a while. So, and hopefully I'll get to see you at one of our upcoming events. But Lisa, thank you so much.
Thank you, Charles. Really greatly appreciate it. I appreciate what you guys are doing to keep franchisors compliant and to make them do the right things and keep the guardrails on for them.
Yeah, no, it's all fun. It's all a ton of fun. Thanks, Lisa.
All right.